Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where Dr. Jannine Krause, that's me, gives you, a health junkie, a weekly dose of tools to help you increase your energy and resilience to life's stressors. Hello there, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing R. Blank. He is the CEO of Shield Your Body. It's an EMF protection company. Now, R has a history of working with some of the top companies in tech for years and years, and he was doing a lot of their beta testing, and he discovered that we need to really be conscious of how much electromagnetic frequencies, so EMF, are coming out of our devices and how to live with these devices in a cohesive world so that we're not ending up damaging our health from them. So he created Shield Your Body, but he also has a lot of history with EMF since his dad, Martin Blank, is one of the leading scientists on EMF. So he and his dad created a book, Overpowered, about 10 years ago talking about EMF, and Shield Your Body, his company, is now a product of all of his research in helping folks to protect themselves from EMFs. So today's podcast, we're going to be talking all about how you can live healthfully with your technology and what you can do and the impacts that it is having on health so that you can be aware of what you're looking at when it comes down to buying technology and utilizing technology in your home. So let's get on with the podcast. Hello there, health junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Jannine Krause. And on today's episode, I have R. Blank. And we're going to be talking all about, yes, his business, but also EMFs and how they affect you. Because I think a lot of people were super excited about 5G and like, yeah, I can download things faster. I can get so much information. I can multitask like a crazy person. But then we didn't really realize what kind of impact that this would have on our bodies. And ours company, Shield Your Body, is an amazing company that we are definitely going to talk about. But most importantly, guys, I want you to be paying attention to the concept of the fact that electromagnetic frequencies do have an impact on your body. And I hope by the end of this podcast, you will have gained some information on that and you are ready to take control of how much exposure you have. So R, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, we're going to geek out a little bit because I've talked about EMFs before and we've talked in the level of what you can do, but we haven't talked a lot about really the science behind it, what's going on in terms of how we can actually shield our bodies, but we also haven't talked a lot about the impact on the body with exposure. And your website is a plethora of information. I geeked out for like, I don't know how many hours. I got lost in the SYB website. So folks, you guys got to check it out. There's just so much information. But one of the biggest things, as a doc, I've been seeing is a lot of connections with insomnia, mental health, and then mold stuff with EMFs. And your dad did a ton of research. You jumped on with him. So I'm guessing like over the years, you've probably seen all kinds of connections down the line with EMFs.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, EMF and we can talk a little bit about what EMF actually is and where it comes from.
Yes.
But the body of science that we now have, and that's continuing to grow, is showing biological and physiological effects on virtually every biological system that we measure. So it's not only that EMF affects everybody, it's that EMF appears to affect essentially every part of our body and in different ways in different people.
Wow. So yes, like you mentioned, we probably should talk about what is EMFs, because if someone hasn't listened to a previous podcast on EMF, we think about EMF in terms of Ghostbusters and looking for, can we use the EMF reader and see if there's a ghost in our house? But really, where is it coming from? How is a cell phone emitting it? Let's talk cell phones, because I think that's probably one of the biggest areas that folks don't realize, and they've got them on them all the time.
Sure. So EMF, and it sounds like a lot of your listeners may already know this, so I'll be really quick with it. But EMF stands for electromagnetic field. It's a form of energy that's created by a combination of electricity and magnetism. That's where the name comes from. Now, there's a kind of EMF that everyone knows, even if they didn't know they knew it, and that is sunlight. Sunlight is a form of EMF. And really, for all of history of all life on Earth, it was essentially the only form of EMF. that all life was exposed to and that life evolved to coexist with. There's also a small magnetic field from the planet itself. And then about 200 years ago, with the invention of the light bulb, we started down this path of creating and emitting more and more of this human-made EMF into our environment. So first we had the light bulb, then we had the power grid to power the light bulb. Then once the grid was in place, we had all these appliances that were created, like refrigerators and blenders and everything like that that was designed to run on the grid. So all of those were sources of EMF. Now, eventually people realized you could use EMF to communicate wirelessly, to send information wirelessly. So you ended up with radio and radar and television. Then more recently, as you know, right, we got cell phones and cordless phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So anything that communicates wirelessly and anything that runs on power, these are sources of human-made EMF. So you had a question then about, and that was just a quick background. You had a question about cell phones in particular. So cell phones work by sending and receiving a form of EMF called radio frequency, or RF, also sometimes called microwave. This is the same type of radiation that your microwave oven uses to cook food. And cell phones are designed to communicate possibly over several miles. So they have the ability to send very powerful signals. And so that's why cell phones are such a significant source of EMF in our lives.
Oh, wow. So, back in the day, so I'm a product of the late 70s, early 80s, and we talked about microwaves and oh my gosh, what are we doing to our food? What are we doing to our brain? Don't stand in front of the microwave. My husband yells at me, when I do it. And I happened at our old house to have that was my work area in the kitchen, right where the microwave was. And, I started to think about, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot everything that I learned in the 90s, like the 80s and 90s about the microwave, and was thinking only about my EMFs on my phone. And now it's kind of, you're putting it together for me going oh, okay, we need to be thinking about this in the same way we thought about microwaves back in the day.
Yeah. Microwave ovens are very significant sources of EMF radiation because not only do you have the microwaves themselves, but it takes a lot of power to generate those microwaves. And so remember, I said it's not only the wireless radiation like microwaves, it's also anything that runs on power. So microwave ovens are big sources not only of the microwave radiation, but also the power radiation required to generate those microwaves. So they're really significant. A lot of people think they're shielded and radiation doesn't leak, but that's not true. If you put your phone into a microwave and call it, you'll see that it rings. And that shows you that it is not sufficiently shielded. And this is why the manuals advise pregnant women not to use them. So I personally have never owned a microwave, but when people do, I say, if you're going to use it, A, use it as infrequently as possible, but B, get as far away from it as possible when it's on. If possible, go into the next room while it's working. So it is a very significant, for people who have and use them, it is a very significant source of EMF in their lives.
Wow. I didn't have one for 10 years. And then we bought a house that had one. And then it's I forgot all about why I didn't want one in the first place. So really good reminder here. And so I think for a lot of folks, this connection between, radiation, and it's like radiation. I think we think about radiation in terms of we go and get an x-ray and we've got to put that leaded, shield on us, say if we go to the dentist and they're going to take a look at our mouth. And so it's much like, just so we can clarify for folks, it's much like that, right?
So actually x-rays are a form of EMF. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned sunlight before as a form of EMF. You can think of EMF as existing on a spectrum. Mm-hmm. And right at the middle of that spectrum is sunlight. So there's forms of EMF with more energy than sunlight. And they have so much energy that they're called ionizing forms of EMF because they ionize your cells. That means they actually knock electrons loose from the cells in your body. And ionizing forms of EMF are super dangerous, even in very, very low doses. It is completely non-controversial to say that, which is, as you know, right, when you're getting a dental x-ray, they put a lead jacket on you and the technician leaves the room. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to have as little of this stuff as possible. Now there's other forms of EMF, the forms that we're talking about, which have less energy than visible light. And because they have less energy, they are non-ionizing. They do not knock electrons loose from the cells in your body. And it was for that reason that for a long time, these were thought to be benign or inert. They did not harm life. And it was only in the past, it depends which, when you want to go back to, but roughly the science started coming out about 100 years ago, and it started getting really a lot stronger 30, 40 years ago, that we've learned that those assumptions that non-ionizing EMF was harmless, those assumptions were false. But that's how the type of radiation that we're talking about today relates to something like X-rays.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I know a lot of people kind of get to wondering, how does this all fit into the scheme of things?
Yeah.
Now, 5G is kind of like a bigger dose of things, if you will, in terms of how we went from the 4th generation of communication now to this 5th generation of things. So will you explain to folks now, how or why 5G is even more important to be protecting yourself from all of those waves that are?
Sure. So there's a couple of reasons there. So first off, 5G, it was designed from the ground up to support many, many, many more devices, right? As all of these different things, it's not only that more and more people have cell phones, it's that more and more people have more and more different devices. Mm-hmm. And all of these smart devices need to communicate wirelessly. So the networks that we had for 4G and still have, but for 4G, they are getting bogged down, and they will continue to get more bogged down with network congestion. So 5G was engineered from the ground up to support much more traffic, and that includes more devices. It also includes faster downloads. Mm-hmm. In order for that to work, they needed a new infrastructure, and they needed new segments of the electromagnetic spectrum. Right? I already talked about how EMF is on a spectrum, right. And so whereas 3G and 4G operated in one part of that spectrum with certain frequencies, 5G starts where 4G was, right? So the early deployments of 5G have the same frequencies as 4G, but 5G is designed to go up to 300 gigahertz, which is has much more energy than what 4G has. And in fact, some of your listeners might have heard the term millimeter wave. Mm-hmm. Because at that frequency, the waves get so short that they're a millimeter and smaller in width. And so 5G is introducing a whole new set of frequencies into our exposures. These are frequencies that are not only higher than 4G, but they've never actually been used in consumer technology before. So these are all new exposures. And in fact, there's almost no scientific data as to what the health impact of this shift will be. And that is a source of concern among many people. Yeah. Separately, which I happen to think is an even greater source of concern, is, as I mentioned, 5G was engineered from the ground up in order to support more connections. What that means is it creates the landscape for more and more of these wireless devices. Each of those devices becomes new sources of our own personal exposures. So whereas, 30 years ago, very few of us were even exposed to a cell phone. Maybe you had a cordless phone in your house, but you didn't have a cell phone. Then you started getting cell phone exposures. Then you started getting Wi-Fi exposures. But even as all of those started adding up, your lock wasn't a source of EMF. Your thermostat wasn't a source of EMF. It sounds silly, but your kitty litter box wasn't a source of EMF. But these are now all becoming new sources of EMF. And this is part of something that is often referred to as the Internet of Things, where everything in your life, they say everything in your life becomes smart. I say everything in your life becomes yet a new source of EMF exposure. Keeping in mind, right, the science lags the technology, right? So the science that we all know that we can point to that discusses this stuff, that's all based on exposures that happened 10 years ago and 20 years ago, when they were a fraction of what they are today. And when you set the framework, the groundwork, the landscape for all of these new devices to become new sources of EMF, right? our exposures are just going to explode and to skyrocket. And we don't know what that is going to do. We have enough data to know that that's not healthy, but we don't know exactly what it's going to do, because that's how this technology is released. It's released and then the studies come.
Yep. Unfortunately, it seems to be the way things are going these days. But no, we're going to jump off that. Now, I purposely wore my Oura ring because I wanted to talk about it, to remind myself about discussing this, because like you mentioned, the multiple different devices. Like, I'm in front of a computer. I have an Oura ring that I wear. I don't have my Apple Watch on, but at any given time, the average American with all of these tech devices might be like surrounded by 5-10, different things. I'm looking over there. I've got a wireless Bluetooth little speaker over there, and an Alexa, thing over there. And so you're looking at it and you're going like, oh my gosh, there's so many things, which is why it's absolutely important to think about how you can shield yourself. So Shield Your Body, your company, is a great way to start thinking about this in terms of, okay, what do I do? Now, a lot of folks have asked me, and I definitely want to get into the sweat ducts study here in a minute. So folks, stay tuned. We're going to get there in a second. But a lot of folks will be like, well, what does the shielding stuff have in it that actually protects me? What is the deal? And I saw that you had canopies too for beds. And I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. I'm like, can I just have wear a muumuu? Like, when's the dress coming out? So what's in this stuff? What's helping us block? Like, what do you have in there? You don't have to give away all the secrets, but what?
No, it's not a secret. So yeah, if your listener goes online and just searches for EMF protection, they'll encounter a whole bunch of different options, right? And my products that we sell at shieldyourbody.com, these are all based on something called EMF shielding. And EMF shielding is universally accepted for almost 200 years now, since a British scientist named Michael Faraday created what's known as the Faraday cage. Mm-hmm. And what he found was that when you weave conductive metals into certain patterns, that they deflect certain frequencies of radiation. So they work, at that point, they work kind of like a window shade deflects sunlight. This type of material can deflect EMF radiation. And this has been used for a long time to protect very sensitive electronic equipment, right? Because sensitive electronic equipment can experience interference from these waves that we're talking about here. So for a long time, they built these Faraday cages around very sensitive equipment. Then as technology got better, right, you don't need, when people hear the term cage, they think of at least something like a fence, right? A substantial piece of metal. But technology has gotten to the point where you can actually weave these you can engineer these metallic fibers to be super small. So in my products, right, for instance, in my pocket patch and my baby blanket, the metallic fibers are thinner than a human hair, and they get woven into other materials. And so I mentioned that it's conductive metals that are these materials. In my apparel products, we use silver. And in my non-apparel products, we use generally a mix of nickel and cobalt and copper, depending on the product. And this is not only universally accepted science, this is also easily demonstrable. If your listeners wanted to go out and buy a $160 meter, and I have videos showing how to do this, you can actually see the levels reduce when you start using my products.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, you guys, another big thing that you want to think about on ours website, shieldyourbody.com, is that he has tests of all of his products and even 5G tested stuff, which is pretty dang cool too, because I haven't seen that anywhere else. I think you mentioned no one else is doing that, which I find fascinating because, yeah, a lot of people are like, it's just hogwash. But I've seen the Faraday bag work because we will be like, okay, let's call the phone. It doesn't ring. We're not getting that communication. You can't, leave your phone on and do direction searching or whatever. If you got it in the bag, it doesn't work. So, I mean, we know that these things are definitely pretty dang cool. And the fact that you have underwear, I just wanted to mention that. Guys, he has underwear to shield you, especially if you're like a tech guy and you got your computer on your lap all the time. Because I mean, I'm seeing lower and lower testosterone levels in guys that are in their 20s. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And the only thing I can think of is, hey, do you have your phone in your pocket? Well, yeah, all the time.
Yeah, no, and there's really strong science. I mean, there's strong science on a whole bunch of different areas of health, but when it comes to infertility and subfertility, there, and even now erectile dysfunction, there is very, very, very strong science showing that men who carry their phones in their pockets have lower levels of sperm, sperm health, and motility. And it is a contributing factor to subfertility and infertility. The good news there is that because men regenerate their sperm every 24 hours, that if you remove the source, so if you stop carrying your phone in your pocket, you can actually reverse that condition pretty effectively.
That's awesome. That's awesome. First ladies, it's not that easy, is it?
Yeah. So with women, it is a little, well, with women, it is harder to do that. But, women also have additional, because the body itself can, women, obviously their ovaries are kind of buried more inside. Men, the reproductive organs are kind of dangling on the outside. With women, they're inside, which means they're more protected in the first place. But that's true. Once you do have damage, it is unfortunately not reversible because women are born with all of their eggs. They don't create new ones every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that maybe we could see, like I was saying, a bodysuit or something here soon. I'll joking aside, I probably would wear it. To be honest, I'll be your model for it. Now, there is we had talked about it and you have it on your website, and I totally went down a whole path of geeking out on the sweat ducts, amplifying the effect of 5G. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's why I'm saying the bodysuit situation, because I'm thinking about all of us who exercise and your sweat, your pores are open. And then you've got things like the Aura Ring. I've got, I don't have the Apple Watch on me today, but we've got all these wearables for monitoring our workouts and our readiness scores and all of that. And I'm going, oh my goodness, what are we doing here?
Yeah, well, so that is a study that it's one of the few. So, right, I mentioned that there's very little testing in terms of these frequencies. The study you're talking about is specifically about 60 gigahertz 5G, right? So that's way beyond what's available in 4G, and it is definitely part of the spectrum that's allocated for 5G. And what they found is that human sweat ducts act as an array of tiny helix-shaped antennas, which they speculate, we don't know yet, this is still early stage, but they speculate can amplify the EMF. Now, this actually, my father, you mentioned my father a little earlier, and that's how I got into this. He has a paper where he postulates that DNA acts as a fractal antenna to amplify the impact of EMF. So, and that's not that was done way before 60 gigahertz and 5G and all that sorts of things. But this study in particular that you're talking about from Hebrew University in Jerusalem shows that the sweat ducts can end up amplifying specifically these 60 gigahertz waves.
Wow. I mean, that's insane. And it's kind of cool that we're, able to do these things, but it's not cool. I mean, I don't know. I kind of gotta be like, well, that's kind of cool. No, it's not. But
yeah, well, what I think what it really shows, because again, that's still early stages, and this is a very understudied area because the technology is so new, it's not been possible to do these tests. What it really underscores is that this technology is being deployed without testing. Yeah. We become the guinea pigs, whether we want to or not, because you can opt out of having a 5G phone, but if you live in a city, you can't opt out of being near a 5G tower.
Right.
And so we end up becoming the guinea pigs because that all of these regulations are based, the ones that exist, and they're super poorly enforced, but even at least there are some regulations. And what the regulations are based on is something called the thermal effect. Right, we already talked about how a microwave oven uses this type of EMF to cook food. So what's different between a microwave oven and your cell phone? A microwave oven has much, much, much more power. So you apply an EMF with enough power, and we know that it can cook food, it can burn tissue. That is called the thermal effect. And all of these regulations exist to prevent the thermal effect. So theoretically, your phone is not supposed to emit as enough EMF to heat your body. Now, for those of us who have ever held a phone up to our head for a long conversation, we know that's not true. But that's what the regulations are based on. The problem is all of these health effects that we're talking about and that are documented by science, they occur at levels much, much, much lower than the thermal effect. We're talking about orders of magnitude lower. So you don't need enough EMF radiation exposure to heat your body in order for that EMF to actually be negatively impacting your health.
Wow. And I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, honestly, since 5G was rolled out, I've seen more mental health issues. I've seen insomnia, like I mentioned. I've also seen a surgence in mold issues. And you have a fascinating article on your website about the mold, because I was like, oh, this could be one of the keys, because mold, as in the natural medicine world, in the functional medicine world, conventional docs don't really dive into it too much, unfortunately, but it's one of the trickiest conditions to treat. And in my mind, I'm like, it might be the EMFs keeping us from treating it.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different issues there, and thank you for, boy, you really did do a nice deep dive on my website.
Did my homework.
So one of the things that's related to what you're talking about is there is science showing that EMF can stimulate mold growth. So that's before it even touches our body, before it becomes a factor in our personal health, that EMF in the environment can stimulate mold growth. Then mold can trigger these toxic reactions in our body. And there is a whole set of science showing that EMF exposure can exacerbate toxic reactions to other toxins. So you'll see this in terms of exposure to mold. You'll see it in terms of Lyme disease. You'll see it in terms of people with MCS, or multiple chemical sensitivity, where these sensitivities, I'm struggling for the correct word, but each toxin increases the sensitivity to the other toxins.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the situation with mold, I only learned about that one actually last year. That wasn't even we didn't cover that in the book that I wrote with my dad. But that is a very concerning one. The ones I see more frequently in my line of work from people who are coming to me for help are the people who have Lyme disease, or who are recovering from Lyme disease, or the people who have multiple chemical sensitivity. And these people not only experience worse symptoms, they tend to be more likely to have a condition that is still a little poorly understood, but is often called EHS, or electrohypersensitivity syndrome. And that is where the body, where your body reacts to exposures of EMF that other people don't even notice, and you can trigger very, very painful symptoms. So that's why they say you're hypersensitive as opposed to somebody else. The issue is, with the level of EMF growing in our environment so much every year, more and more and more people are realizing that they have this level, right? Because as the level of the toxin in the environment grows, the more people are going to hit that threshold at which they're personally impacted.
Yeah. No, I have no doubt that that's going to happen. And I've found it. I mean, like, it's compounded in this last year alone. A lot of people are blaming it on just the virus of du jour right now. But in the scheme of things, I'm like, no, I don't think it's all that. I think we're really looking at this rollout of 5G that just happened to coincide a lot with things that are happening in this current time. So in my mind, I'm looking at it going, oh my goodness, everyone needs to have like their kit of EMF protection. Like, I truly, I am hardcore on that now with patients. And I'm like, you guys need to be getting on this stuff, and looking at it. And one of the things I wanted to mention, because I saw it when you had come on the screen there, is you've got your little hard case there. That's the little plug-in. And folks, this is something that I think a lot of us should be thinking about, because if you're on the phone, obviously we have to use our phones. We can't get away with it. It's one of these things where we have to figure out how to live with the EMFs and how to keep ourselves from being negatively affected with them. But if you have the cell phone, you don't have to have everything on speakerphone. You can use ear headsets, but specific headsets, because you've got a headset, but you also have the case there. Will you explain to us how that works?
Sure. So, and I guess some people will be listening to us and won't see the video, but it's an adapter, right? So just like you'd plug your headset into your phone or your laptop, with this, you plug the adapter into your phone or laptop, then you plug your headset into this. And inside is a bath of dielectric gel, which as the signal is coming through the adapter, it absorbs the excess EMF, converts it into heat. It's a very, very small amount of heat, so you don't feel it. And then the signal then continues through to your headset. Now, I should say, as a starting, a little bit of background on this, right? First thing is a regular headset, like old school, like that you used to get with your iPhone, not the kind you get now with your iPhone, but that you used to get with your iPhone. These are much, much, much safer than holding a phone up to your head, no doubt. And if you just have a regular wired headset, then you should use that. The issue is, because they're wired headsets, they obviously have wire in them. And so they can conduct radiation from your phone through the headset up to your ears. Mm-hmm. And so that's where anti-radiation headsets come in. And air tubes are a very common kind of those. SYB makes air tubes, which your listeners can find on my website. The problem with air tubes is that the sound just isn't there. So because what they do is they convert the sound from wire to air, and then that's what you're listening to. And that's great for listening to this podcast and for talking on phones for conversations. So I use air tubes for those two things. The problem is when you need good sound quality. Yeah. And because air tubes don't have good sound quality. So that's actually where the hard comes in, this little adapter that we're talking about. In fact, this product was not invented as an EMF protection device. It was invented as a way to improve sound quality, because all of this EMF radiation that comes across these cables, it's interference with the audio signal. Oh. So this was invented to strip out the stray electromagnetic fields to clarify the audio signal. So, but then we realized, oh, well, it actually also works as an EMF reducer. And so not only does this not have the downside of air tubes where things sound worse, this actually improves the sound. And so I really love this product. And it comes in, right, the default is a 3.5 millimeter, like a standard headset jack that you can get on your laptop or your iPad, and on older iPhones and on some Androids. And now we also have a version that ships with a USB-C adapter. So it works on basically every device that isn't an iPhone.
Very cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
That's awesome. And I mean, I think those kind of things, yes, being in the podcast world, having good audio is important, but I think, just in general, having something, because every time I used to have the earbuds, those things would give me a headache within minutes. And so I can't use them at all. Is there anything that is, because those are all Bluetooth, I can't imagine that there's anything you can do to really block from those?
No, unfortunately not. And this gets into, and I'm happy to talk about it. I think to do it justice, you'd need to invite me back for another episode. Sure. But because the issue is with wearables, right? One of the things that, I mean, there's basically, before you even get to buying any EMF protection, there's two things you can do. And that is to buy less of this EMF tech and use it less, right? So maybe you do want your thermostat to be wireless, but maybe you don't need your lock to be wireless, or maybe you don't need a smart refrigerator, right? Just buy less of this stuff. And then when you have it, use it less, like turn off your Wi-Fi at night. So there's ways where you just buy less of this stuff and you use it less. That's great. That prevents the exposure before it even happens. Then the second step is to keep stuff as far away from your body as possible. So that's why you should never carry your phone in your pocket. You should never hold a phone up to your head. You should never use a laptop in your lap. The problem then you can start to see with any technology that's wearable is it is literally impossible to create that distance. It is literally impossible to use it at a safer distance. And with an increasing amount of these things, shielding is not possible. Right. So you mentioned an Apple Watch earlier, and that is actually a piece of wearable tech where we do have a product specifically designed for smartwatches. But AirPods and other Bluetooth headsets, it is not possible to shield. These new, I think they're called Ray-Ban Stories, the product from Ray-Ban and Facebook, not possible to shield. Google Glass, a bit of a dated reference, but I was one of their beta testers specifically to test EMF. And I at the time I was still young and naive, and I thought maybe I could figure out a shield. It is not possible to shield. So with all of this wearable tech, that is very concerning to me, because it is impossible to increase the distance, and it is in almost every case impossible to shield. And again, everyone needs to remember these exposures are all additive. They are in addition to what you were already exposed to, which is way more than you were exposed to 10 years ago, way more than you were exposed to when you were a kid, way more than your parents were exposed to when they were kids. And it's said, but your kids today are getting these exposures, and it's going to keep growing and keep growing. So you really, I'm very worried about wearables. I think, everyone, because to me, if you actually spend time to look at the science, you'll see that the science is very strong. And if anyone wants a summary of that, the book I wrote with my father, Overpowered, it's 10 years old now, but it's still a fantastic book. The science is very strong, but for a lot of people, they're going to wait for some kind of tipping point moment where it's just obviously causing a lot of disease, and the link is unmissable. And I think the more people wear wearable tech, you give it 5 years, maybe 7 years from that point in time, that's when you're going to start to say, oh my God, it's obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And for those of us who are in the medical field who have actually put the connection together, we're like, oh my God, it's obvious now. And it's, the other big thing that I didn't mention, and I'll mention now, is the thyroid. I've noticed so many people, like I would say 85% of the females that come into my office, there's a thyroid issue. And if I can get them away from tech, I see things improve. And your gator, I was like, I started to think about how, we have to wear masks in certain places, and granted, gators are debatable. I'm like, you know what? That might be my new gig. I might be doing that now, because I'm thinking about the thyroid. My dad, and you can see I'm touching my neck with my freaking Oura ring. I'm gonna take that off. Right at my thyroid. And so these are things that I start to think about in terms of, watches, whatnot, we're going near this area. And then of course the regular exposure that we're getting into. And I do think that's why I can't regulate thyroids either. I truly believe that's why.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, so there's, that reminds me of two things. One is that there is now science showing a link between EMF exposure and thyroid cancer. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, you're seeing very strong science in the area of endocrine function. Mm-hmm. And the one that most people talk about when it comes to EMF is the production of melatonin, which I believe is the pineal gland.
Yes.
Am I okay? Thank you.
You got it.
High five. And so there's pretty strong science showing that EMF exposure disrupts melatonin production, which is one of the links to both sleep disruption and anxiety. But you're seeing effects of EMF on the entire endocrine system. And so again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that you're seeing health effects from exposure to EMF radiation in essentially every biological system that we study. And it's our entire bodies are exposed. When we are exposed, our entire bodies are exposed, and the mechanisms that are being triggered are common through. So, for instance, there's very strong science showing that exposure to EMF, and again, I want to underscore, I'm talking about low-powered exposures, well within safety limits, like the kind you would get by using a cell phone or even just having one near you, right? That exposure to EMF from a cell phone or a cordless phone causes DNA mutations, can even lead to double strand breaks and trigger apoptosis or cell death. These are the same kinds of mechanisms that you see in tumor formation. There's other science that is increasingly cited right now, I should say, because it is believed to be a key mechanism for many other biological outcomes, right? Where the voltage-gated calcium channels are being disrupted, which throws off the amount of calcium that's being produced in your cells, which is directly causes oxidative stress, which in turn causes all these other. But the reason I'm saying all this now is these mechanisms are everywhere, right? It's not like only you only have DNA in your hand, or even you only have DNA in your brain. You have DNA everywhere. So when you have a toxin that you're exposing your whole body to, and that toxin causes DNA mutation and cell death, those impacts can be seen in every system where they're measured. And so thyroid is one, though, where recently there's strong science about tumors in particular growing. And you see, because everyone, when they talk about cell phones, right, everyone immediately thinks about brain tumors. And I understand why, right? That's friggin' terrifying. You do not want a brain tumor, but you see it in thyroid tumors. You see it in colorectal cancer. Increasingly, you can find it in breast cancer. These mechanisms are shared by our entire body.
Yeah.
I apologize for going off on a rant there.
No, I think it's important to really drive home, the point here. No, granted, there might be a lot of folks listening right now that are terrified and like, oh my God, now what do I do? How do I get this out of my body? And, I talk about this here and there on the podcast, but the tech, detox, and you mention it also on your website on shieldyourbody.com. And I think it's really something for folks to be thinking about. Has anyone ever done any research on how, I guess, like a prescription for tech detox, and what would be like, how many hours do you get out in the woods, leave your phone away, kind of things of that nature? How much time away from all of your material in the woods do we need? And of course, we're going to still have exposure because we're still in a world anyway, but how much do you know if any, like we could give a prescription?
It's funny that you say that, because I'm actually right now we're planning and booking season 2 of my podcast, the Healthier Tech podcast.
Yeah. And
season 2 is all about digital detox. And I'm specifically looking for someone who can talk to the question that you just asked. Awesome. So unfortunately today, I don't have that answer, but hopefully within a week or two, I will have that answer.
You guys, you gotta listen to the podcast. That's it.
Yeah. I appreciate that. But no, I'm a big fan. I've been a big fan of digital detox even before I got into EMF. I had a 20-year career in software development. I was out in California. I was in the high-tech scene. And I was really like the only one of my peer group who loved turning off his phone for like a day at a time. Or when I went on vacation, I was infamous that like I was the only guy who went on vacation that you couldn't actually reach when he was on vacation. And I've long been a big advocate for digital detox. And now, as I've done more work in EMF, but also as tech has grown and grown and grown, I am increasingly seeing not only the value of it, but just the importance of it, that everyone, and it's for more reasons than just EMF. I mean, you see it now increasingly, people are with what's going on with Facebook in particular, right? Where they see the mental impact that this has, using these tools has on people, just breaking away from it for even a few days is you really, if you just try it, you'll see it. You don't even necessarily know how to measure it for yourself, but you will see the changes in yourself in just a couple of days. It is pretty remarkable. Personally, I haven't actively used social media since 2015. And I still have it for my businesses, because if you're running a business, you need it. But I don't personally use it. And I remember it took about 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks of not, at the time it was Facebook was the big one for me, of not you, I just got, I don't know if happier is the right term, but calmer, and anxiety levels dropped down, and just things seemed just better. And the things I was afraid of missing out on didn't even matter anymore. And I am a huge advocate for everybody to do that. Then you also mentioned things like going out into nature. Earthing and grounding in nature is not only, I mean, it is good for your mental state, but there's actually strong science on this, that there's physical reactions with your body that are measurable. And so when you are walking barefoot in the forest or on the beach, you are deionizing your body, and the health impact, A, that voltage is itself measurable, but B, the health impacts that from that experience are also measurable. And so even if you can do that just for a half hour every other day, that is you are going to see improvements from that.
I love that. Anytime I can get outside with no shoes on and some grass, heaven, it's absolutely perfect. I think that'll give some folks, thank you for mentioning, I think that'll give some folks somewhere to start, and then they just have to stay tuned to season 2 of your podcast. And then
it's a great question. It's one that's getting, I think increasingly relevant, and more people are actually interested in the answer. And yes, I am actively seeking the known science on the health effects of detox.
I love it. We have talked about so many different things, and I think folks are probably like, okay, I want this podcast over so I can go to your website. So shieldyourbody.com is the main website. And then you also mentioned Overpowered, your book with your dad. You can find it on your website.
No, that's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Okay. I'm like, I saw it somewhere, but okay. Amazon for that. And then the podcast. Tell us about the podcast. When is season 2 coming out? What's going on with that? Where can they find you for that?
Sure. Thank you for, so the podcast is called the Healthier Tech Podcast. We're on all the major podcasting platforms, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify. We launched it this year. And the whole purpose of the podcast is to explore issues related to finding a healthier balance in our relationship with technology. Obviously, I spend a lot of my time talking about EMF and the health impacts of EMF, but I'm also a big believer, even outside of the EMF issue, that there are a growing number of problems in terms of our relationship with technology, both as a society and as individuals. But I am not a Luddite. I am a firm believer also in the value of technology. Yes. So the idea is to explore topics about finding a healthier balance in our relationship with technology. As I mentioned, season 2 is going to be all about digital detox. And we are aiming to get that out in January of 2022.
Awesome. We will definitely be promoting that as well for you, because I'm excited to hear about that, because I as well love technology, but want to learn how to live with it and not have it kill me at the same time. Now, of course, we have a freebie for everybody. It is the SYB Power Pack, which is a PDF with all kinds of information in there. And we also have got a 15% discount for purchases on SYB for the first purchase. Gosh, thank you so much for all of the fabulous information. We are definitely going to have you back and talk more depth into the tech on things and more details, because this is such a big topic, but also such a big thing that I think a lot of people are still overlooking. We need to get the word out that there is so much to be learned about how to protect yourself from all the EMFs out there. So thank you so much for coming on the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the opportunity and just your interest in this topic. I really thank you very much.
Oh man, we're going to geek out some more. Don't you worry. All right, folks, stay tuned for another episode of the Health Fix. Hey, Health Junkie, do you want to take the conversation to the next level based off of the Health Fix podcast? Well, you're in luck. Head over to the Facebook group for this podcast called Find Your Health Fix. There you'll find me answering questions, but also dropping in all kinds of tidbits and keeping the conversation going all about health. And you'll never know what you might learn and what might open up a door to a new you.